Continuing our investigation into the gateless barrier. Case 11. Zhaozhou and the Hermits. Zhaozhou went to a hermit's cottage and asked, "Anybody in? Anybody in?" The hermit lifted up his fist. Zhaozhou said, "The water is too shallow for a ship to anchor," and he left. Again he went to a hermit's cottage and asked, "Anybody in? Anybody in?" This hermit too lifted up his fist. Zhaozhou said, "Freely you give, freely you take away, freely you kill, freely you give life," and he made a full bow. Wumenguan says, both held up their fists in the same way. Why did Zhaozhou approve of one and not the other? Tell me, what is the core of this complication? If you can give a turning word on this matter, you will realize that Zhaozhou's tongue has no bone in it. He is free, now helping others stand up, now pushing them down. Be that as it may, can you realize also that Zhaozhou was seen through by the two hermits? Furthermore, if you say that one of the hermits was superior to the other, you do not yet have the eye of reflective study. And if you say there is no difference between them, you do not yet have the eye of reflective study. Wumenguan's verse says, "Eye like a shooting star, activity like lightning, the sword that kills, the sword that gives life." There's a lot of commentary, I guess, about this particular case. I suppose it's to be expected because the main player in the case is Zhaozhou, Zhaozhou in Japanese, the same Zhaozhou of case 1, Zhaozhou's mu. There is a lot of discussion about what the circumstances about this case are. Some people say that there was a time in Zhaozhou's practice when he was on pilgrimage, where after doing some initial training, he went around for a period, they say, of 20 years, visiting various teachers and priests and hermits and checking them out, testing his own clarity, matching up with people all over China. And some people say that this may be the case in this circumstance, that he was walking through an area and finding hermits' cottages, he would go and see if anybody was in. Some people say that this happened later. Zhaozhou, there's other cases where people around his temple would say interesting things or do interesting things, and he would be notified or told about it or questioned about something that happened. And he would say, that sounds interesting, I'll go check it out. And he'd leave the monastery dressed, just as a regular monk and go check out these people, see what's going on there. His personal motto when he first took up practice was that even if it's a child, if they have some clarity that I can learn from, I will beg them for their help. And even if it's a man of 100, if I have something that I can teach them or share with them, clarify for them, then I will do that. And that's his attitude and practice, always committed to clarifying this great matter. And so, regardless of whether he was coming from the monastery or whether he was on pilgrimage, his function, his activity is the same, to clarify this great matter. Never knowing whether he's going to be the one learning or the one teaching, or maybe some of both. Some people say that in fact there aren't two hermits, but that these are two visits to the same hermit. But there's no knowing these things. The Chinese language, I'm told, allows for an awful lot of ambiguity. And so when you start trying to figure out things like what the circumstances are, it can be very difficult to clarify. But going right from the beginning, Zhaozhou went to a hermit's cottage and asked, "Anybody in? Anybody in?" This alone is an interesting opener. A hermit's cottage. So here at Zenwest we have a hermitage. It's 8 feet by 12 feet, just under 100 square feet. And that's kind of a traditional size for a hermitage. And so if you can imagine Zhaozhou opening up the door to the hermitage and shouting, "Anybody in?" Do you think if there was a hermit in the hermitage that would be a question you really needed to ask? I think if you opened the door and there was a hermit in there, you'd know right away. So what's this question, "Is anybody in?" about? Well, if you've been paying attention over the past several days, you will know that these kind of calls, "Who is it? Is anybody home?" are invitations to an interaction. Invitations to demonstrate this great matter. How do you demonstrate one true nature? This is all that Zhaozhou is asking. Cutting right to the chase without any pretense or greeting or anything like that. He's not mincing words and not wasting time. "Anybody in? Who do you think you are? Who is it?" This is his opener. In response, the first hermit raises up his fist. Again, I encourage you to look at these koans, investigate these koans from all perspectives. So The question is, how is it for you as the hermit, sitting there, maybe doing some zazen, or making a cup of tea, or eating a little bowl of food, and your door opens up. Anybody in? It's just like last night, someone in the middle of a talk comes in. Anybody in? May we join you? And this hermit has the presence of mind to respond just by raising his fist. What is a fist? What does it mean in this circumstance? What's being demonstrated by the raising of a fist? Zhaozhou said, "The water is too shallow for a ship to anchor." And he left. Now, a lot of people say that this is a kind of a criticism, saying that the hermit is too shallow. There's no point in trying to stay here. It's too shallow. Another way that we might understand that is that it's dangerous to stay. Zhaozhou perceives that this hermit is on top of his game, and it would be dangerous for him to stay. That's another way of seeing it. Again, he went to a hermit's cottage and asked, "Anybody in? Anybody in?" This hermit too lifted up his fist. Zhaozhou said, "Freely you give, freely you take away, freely you kill, freely you give life." And he made a full bow. This is a very different response to his first time. And the question is always, why? Why is it so different? What is it about the presentation of the two hermits that provokes such a different response from Zhaozhou? We don't have too much information aside from that each of the hermits raised a fist. But taking up our own practice, one of the things that we can look at or we can point to shed some light on this case. This is, in a lot of ways, I find this one of the most difficult cases to give a talk about, because it's a case that so entirely depends on your own capacity to see. It's very difficult to explain seeing to somebody who doesn't see. So in our own practice, each and every day, we have several aspects which are, for all external purposes, they are the same. Each morning we chant, and we chant the same chants. And we have meal practice. And the form is the same form. Each transition we have bows that we do. And we can say that we have the same bows. But isn't it the case that as we go through the day, there are sometimes where we hit it right on? There is a presence, there is a clarity, there's a crispness, there's a livingness to the bow, to the chant, to the activity that we're engaged in. And sometimes we miss it entirely. Sometimes when we come down for interview and we're working on a koan, we give a demonstration. And sometimes we hit it right on. Totally clear. Surprise ourselves even. Sometimes we aim for the mark, but we are just not up to the task. We're off to the side. And oftentimes, rather than just calling it out myself, I'll turn it around and say, what do you think of that? Because of all aspects of practice, one that is very important is the ability to see this clarity. Or to see this lack of clarity, this fixation, our own fixation with ourselves. Both held up their fists in the same way. Why did Zhaozhou approve of one and not the other? Tell me, what is the core of the complication? If you can give a turning word on this matter, you will realize that Zhaozhou's tongue has no bone in it. He is free, now helping others stand up, now pushing them down. Be that as it may, can you realize also that Zhaozhou was seen through by the two hermits? This is a very important aspect of this case, because we're kind of led in our thinking about this case and what's taking place in the case. Whenever we have this kind of notion of going around and testing hermits, as this case is called, we really fall into a subject and object kind of thinking. We fall into a conventional way of looking at things. We look at an interaction between two people, two players, as a sort of binary interaction where in something like Dharma combat, which is clearly what's going on here, we have somebody who comes out on top. We have a winner and a loser. And it's very difficult for us when we read something like this to not just completely fall head over heels into this way of thinking. We have a very direct comparison. And if that weren't enough, Wumen further pushes this idea on us, further pushes this approval and disapproval idea on us. And when we investigate this case, if we approach it like this, what we find is that we are leaving somebody out. We're sort of discounting somebody, or we're replacing somebody with an idea. And in this particular case, if we perceive it, or we look at this case from that perspective, the person that we're leaving out is Zhaozhou. We're leaving out the role, the practice, the perspective of Zhaozhou, making him into some kind of judge. And I can say with no hesitation, if we are investigating koans, and our position is to sort of not fully consider the role of Zhaozhou in the case, we're making a terrible, terrible, terrible mistake. It's important, I think, for us to go back to Zhaozhou's commitment to practice. His perspective is not, I'm going to go out there and become the most enlightened person anywhere. I'm going to go out there and best all the Dharma teachers that are in the world and be the best. His perspective is to learn, to develop from anybody who has anything to teach me. And to teach and to share with anybody who I have something that I can help them with. When we practice with one another, it's very easy to slip into the sort of dualistic way of thinking, wanting to be better at practice than somebody else, wanting to be seen as higher up or more experienced or deeper in some way. We can sit in a room full of people meditating and just be sitting there sort of assessing the circumstances and figuring out where we are in the grand hierarchy of the meditation group. And this is totally, totally common. We can participate in a sangha and just be concerned with the social, political aspect of it. It's very easy to forget practice. It's very easy to bring these sort of habits and perspectives from our lives, from our work, from our relationships, from the culture that we're raised in, and to overlay it on top of this endeavor of awakening. And whenever we do it, as I've been going on and on and on over the past several days, we transform it. We transform this thing which is bigger than us, bigger than me and bigger than you. We change it into an activity of thingness, an object activity. We break it down into little tasks that we can do, skills that we can develop, positions that we can gain. We turn it into just a materialistic endeavor, an acquisitive endeavor. But when we look at this case, what we see is Zhaozhou immersed in the practice of continual awakening. This word bodhisattva that we chant all the time, we are all familiar with by now, I'm sure. Bodhisattva. Bodhi is awakening, and sattva is being. And I think it's really easy for us to think about bodhisattva as a being who is awakening. And when we practice and we make vows that I am taking the vows of a bodhisattva, we think, I am a being who is awakening. And I think that that's an okay way. It's an okay way to understand what this word bodhisattva means. But in order for us to grasp what's going on in this case, we have to sort of flip it around a little bit so that we can understand bodhisattva as awakening, the manifestation of awakening, a being of awakening, or awakening personified. Yeah, embodied awakening. Linji, I was mentioning this in a previous talk, had this formula of guest and host. Circumstances that arise, guest meets host, host meets guest, guest meets guest, host meets host. And this is a similar and different way of understanding what's being spoken about in this case, and what's being engaged in every time we meet, and every time we read a case in which there are two or more players. This activity of host and guest. One who is demonstrating something or clarifying something, the other who is asking or seeing or hearing, or not seeing or hearing. Sometimes that happens too. When we flip it around, this case, to the other perspective, and we say, at one time there was a hermit named such and such living on a mountain, and one day the door opened and the person said, "Anybody in?" The hermit responded by raising his fist. The stranger says, "The water is too shallow for a ship to anchor," and he leaves. How does this impact? How does this curt response impact the hermit? How would it impact you? How is it when we come down to the interview room, we're asked to demonstrate a koan, and we really put forth a great effort, and the teacher says, "Oh, the water is too shallow here to anchor a ship," and rings the bell. Go on. How does that impact you? How do you respond? Crushed. Why crushed? This is a great question. What is the value of crushed? What happens when you go down to interview and you're asked to demonstrate your koan, and you really make a great effort, and the teacher says, "Oh, freely you give, freely you take away, freely you kill, freely you give life," and makes a full bow. How is it then? Maybe you feel, "Oh, yeah, really good. I really nailed that sucker." All elevated, you come back to the Zendo. But isn't this just being attached? Isn't this just another way that we connect our fundamental value, to what we make, what we do? Riding up and down on the approval and disapproval of strangers. Zhaozhou opens the door and says, "Anybody in? Who is this person? Who is this person making up a call? Who is this person asking us to demonstrate our whole insight, our whole understanding? Demonstrate now." And having made your response, who is this stranger who comments and leaves, or comments and bows? It's often said that each aspect of a koan is also just a single aspect of our own nature. When we investigate these cases, we see that different facets or different characters manifest, but these characters aren't outside of us. They are just manifestations of our own nature. In the last case, we talked about the I of Kao Shan and how quickly, necessarily quickly, he's able to assess the circumstances that are going on. And perhaps there is no Zen master in history who is more renowned at seeing and at responding, particularly verbally, than Zhaozhou. But if you're anything like me, you really have to get yourself out of the headspace of bettering, out of judging, and out of good and bad. If we really want to understand Zhaozhou, we have to get out of that headspace. We have to recognize that he is constantly playing. In the first case, Zhoshu's Wumen talks about when we have this insight, when we clarify this great matter, we live life in a merry and playful samadhi. And this is what we have to understand about Zhaozhou as he walks through these cases, walks through these interactions, is that he is engaged in a game of awakening, offering resistance when somebody will benefit from resistance or opposition, offering support when somebody needs a little support. Both held up their fists in the same way. Why did Zhaozhou approve of one and not the other? Can you even really tell me which one Zhaozhou approves of and which one he doesn't? Tell me, what is the core of the complication? If you can give a turning word on this matter, you will realize that Zhaozhou's tongue has no bone in it. He is free, now helping others stand up, now pushing them down. Be that as it may, can you realize also that Zhaozhou was seen through by the two hermits? It's not just one person playing this game. When the door opens in your hermitage, who's there? He doesn't say anything unusual. If someone was just going to walk up to a hermitage, anybody in seems like a reasonable thing to call out, doesn't it? But neither one of these hermits responds with anything mundane, anything usual, like, oh yeah, here I am. No visitors today, please. Right away. Anybody in? Anybody in? A sudden, direct response. Furthermore, if you say that one of the hermits was superior to the other, you do not yet have the eye of reflective study. And if you say there is no difference between them, you do not yet have the eye of reflective study. This is pointing to this principle of fundamental equality and absolute diversity. Each of us is different. Each of us has our own path and our own lives and our own practice. Each and everything in this cosmos has its own life and existence and experience and background and aspirations. So what's the best one? Who's the best person? When we look at it like this, or when I phrase it like this, it seems quite absurd. When we take the subjective perspective out of it, whose life is most valuable? Can we even say anything about that? So when we look at two hermits, or we look at two practitioners of any kind, can we point to either one and say, oh, this is the superior practitioner? It requires a very specific subjective perspective in order to say anything like that. We have to insert ourselves into that comment in order to say anything about it. But likewise, if we look at two practitioners, two hermits, two people, we also can't say that they're the same. They're equal, but not the same. This is me flapping my gums and explaining something that's a very fundamental principle. And all of the explanation in the world won't help you. Even if you know it and you can talk about it, when it comes to this case, it won't help you. When it comes to your own seeing circumstances and your own making of relationship and your own practice, you've really got to grasp this principle for yourself. Zhaozhou, in many ways, is like a Zen Buddha. He is a personification of an ideal capacity that we all have. Each and every one of us. Wumen summarizes the capacity in his verse, "I like a shooting star, activity like lightning." I like a shooting star. The shooting star like lights things up suddenly in the complete darkness. Everything is seen. Activity like lightning, well, fast, instantaneous. Before we can even think, Zhaozhou is acting. And this is our own capacity, our own nature. The sword that kills, the sword that gives life. This is our nature, our dual nature. Each of us has the capacity to meet this moment in the way that is required in this moment. Sometimes we want to be nice all the time. Sometimes we want to be this kind of person or that kind of person. We don't want to say things like this or do things like that. But this is being bound to personality, bound to identity, bound to a self. This is having a bone in your tongue. That means like there are certain things that you just can't say or you won't do or you won't. And what's being pointed to in this case is that Zhaozhou is free. There is no bone in his tongue. He says what's appropriate and required in the circumstances. He does what's appropriate and required in the circumstances. Required to press forward both for himself and for those he's with in the practice of awakening, fulfilling this ancient vow of his. But what's important, I think, in this case is that we grasp that this is not unique to Zhaozhou. We can, through our own practice, make of ourselves such bodhisattvas. We can, through our practice, make of ourselves such tools. as we go about our lives, we can go through our daily activities looking at them as if they're mundane things that we just need to do to get through the day, to get on to the next thing, to get, move ourselves towards our actual goal, which is whatever, the accomplishment of this, that, or the other thing. Or we can engage in our lives from moment to moment as the practice of endless awakening, eternally unfolding awakening. Zhaozhou was a renowned master, and he's in these texts innumerable times. But it's also the truth that his particular lineage died out, because it's said in our tradition that in order to receive transmission, in order to really receive your teacher's blessing, you should transcend or go beyond your teacher. And so it said no disciple of Zhaozhou's could ever really do that. But he makes of himself, or he, through his life, sets forward an example of what's possible. He's not a magical being. He's not a superhuman, and he doesn't have as his content anything other than what you have as your content. All we have to do is just join him in his vow of practice.